I'm very pleased to introduce our next guest because we are honored to have Drew Bowling with us. Drew is the Communication and Policy Advisor for Congressman Jeff Fortenberry and was the staff lead on the genocide resolution in the United States House of Representatives. Drew has traveled widely to the Middle East and met with the different groups there. And so thank you, Drew, for being with us. I'd like to invite you to the stage. Thank you. Is this mic on?
Thank you. I am honored to participate today in this conference. We have assembled here in New York City as a gathering of scholars, religious leaders, activists, and victims of genocide to discuss the critically important issue of the persecution of Christians around the world, especially in the Middle East. Ancient faith traditions that have lived there for millennia are now threatened with extermination. I am privileged to speak to you as the Communications and Policy Advisor for Congressman Jeff Fortenberry. Before I discuss the recent genocide designation, as well as its political implications, I want to confess that I am somewhat shaken. The Congressman just emailed me a handwritten letter from a source that I cannot disclose. The letter documents in a horrifying, detailed chronology the ISIS executions of the nuns in Yemen. ISIS militants caught the nuns, bound them, shot them in the head, and then smashed their heads, just as they destroyed the religious articles of the Blessed Virgin, the crucifix, the altar, and the tabernacle. As the militants bound and executed the helpless victims, Father, as I will call him here, rushed to the convent where he consumed, as the letter quoted, all the hosts, lest the body of Christ face the same desecration that ISIS was even then inflicting on the bodies of the nuns and on the holy artifacts. One nun survived the massacre. The letter writes that she said she was sad she was alone. She was sad, the letter quotes, that she did not die with her sisters. Christians across the Middle East, most grievously in Syria and Iraq, suffer similar atrocities day after day. As the handwriting in the letter reads, as the father told the nuns, "Let us be ready for martyrdom." I happened to be in the room on an extraordinary occasion when Pope Francis was given a small cross, a Christian crucifix. The crucifix belonged to a young Syrian man. He had been captured by jihadists and then given a choice: convert or die. He chose his ancient faith tradition. He chose Christ, and he was beheaded. His mother was able to recover his body along with the crucifix and bury him. She then fled to Europe, encountered a priest who gave her support, and gave him the cross in gratitude. This series of events resulted in the profound moment when the cross came into the possession of the Holy Father. The experience came at the end of an international conference last August, where Congressman Fortenberry and I joined politicians and parliamentarians from around the world. We had gathered in Rome to develop strategic policy initiatives to promote the common good. On the first evening of the conference, a patriarch from the Middle East addressed the assembly about the plight of Christians in Syria and Iraq. Stirred to action, the legislators convened to discuss a course of further action. What could be done to elevate international awareness about the ongoing humanitarian disaster, to better offer support to these vulnerable faith communities at this hour of their greatest need. In response, Congressman Fortenberry and I designed a resolution naming and decrying the ISIS atrocities against Christians, Yezidis, and other ethnic and religious minorities as genocide. A copy of this resolution was handed to Pope Francis in the private audience at which he was also given the cross. When we returned to the United States in September 2015, we introduced the resolution in the United States House of Representatives, and support immediately surged through the halls of Congress. Network action from NGOs, faith communities, religious leaders, policymakers, journalists, and many, many others helped turn the tide during a 6-month national controversy over whether the State Department, which was reportedly considering a genocide designation that would exclude Christians, would fall short of the necessarily ecumenically inclusive determination. A rapidly expanding international coalition, begun in part during that conference in Rome, recognized the reality that ISIS is committing genocide. The European Parliament, the International Association of Genocide Scholars, the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, Pope Francis, and presidential candidates in both parties, among so many others, stood in solidarity to name and decry the genocide. A bipartisan and ecumenical alliance formed to confront ISIS's barbaric onslaught. After gaining 213 bipartisan co-sponsors in the House, at a time of deep political division in our nation, the House of Representatives last month passed the resolution condemning the genocide. The vote, 393 to 0. Unanimous and historic. The statement was clear. Genocide is bigger than any partisan divide. The House spoke with one voice to properly recognize and condemn this violation of life and order. 3 days later, on March 17th, Secretary of State John Kerry and the State Department, on the day of a congressional deadline to make a genocide determination, came to the same conclusion. The essence of the resolution is now the official position of the United States government. This is only the second time in history that the United States has made a statement on genocide while the genocide is still ongoing. The horrific ISIS violence against Christians, Yezidis, and Shia Muslim minorities is now called by its proper name: genocide. Secretary Kerry should be commended for making this important designation. The genocide is not only a grave injustice to these ancient communities, it is an assault on human dignity and an attack on civilization itself. The United States has now spoken with clarity and its full moral authority. Recognizing the ISIS genocide has implications beyond defining the grotesque tragedy. Our stand will raise international consciousness, end the scandal of silence, the scandal of indifference, and ultimately create the preconditions for the protection and reintegration of ancient minorities into their ancestral homelands. The genocide designation opens gateways for further policy considerations regarding the necessary security settlement that must come in the region. The campaign in Congress to recognize the genocide has galvanized sincere and widespread interest in this issue on Capitol Hill, where before far too little had existed. Massive new legislative capital now exists for developing legislative vehicles to support Christians, Yezidis, and other religious minorities in the Middle East. We must act now. There is no more time. The spectrum of policy propositions runs the gamut from refugee assistance to humanitarian aid to recalibrating humanitarian aid, leveraging it through public-private partnerships into sustainable economic development. Of course, security policy is a huge component of all of this as well. Finally, we need to come to some common conclusion about a new form of political support that will allow these communities to retake their rightful place in the homes from which they were so terribly driven. Second, I believe, as so many others on the Hill are beginning to believe, that we need to call for the establishment of a pluralistic, ethnically, and religiously diverse safe haven in the Nineveh Plain. This requires three critical phases: re-securitization, resettlement through right-to-return policy, and revitalization, a central component of which would be restoring some semblance of an operational economy, which, with the proper outside investment, can tap into the region's rich reservoir of natural resources. The Nineveh Plain is the breadbasket of Iraq. You can go there in winter and see green, agriculture, orchards. It's absolutely stunningly beautiful in what it offers to sustain the human person. What's more, underneath the Nineveh Plain is a vast sea of oil that has never been tapped, but with the proper industrial mechanisms can be extracted and exported for refinement. The potential here is vast. All of this, though, is predicated on that first aspect: security. There are currently 3,500 Christians serving officially with the Peshmerga, the military wing of Iraqi Kurdistan, in connection with the KRG. There are 8,000 Yazidi security volunteers as well. These people are trained, they are armed, and they are ready to move forward, again, in an ecumenical alliance to reclaim their homes. This isn't just some pie-in-the-sky fantasy. This is something that needs to happen sooner rather than later. If the Christians, Yezidis, and other ethnic and religious minorities are going to reconstitute what was once the rich tapestry of diversity in the region. There are other units, like the Nineveh Plain Protection Units, that are operating in conjunction with the central government in Baghdad. Now, as we know, the nation states of Syria and Iraq are under increasing strain. The post-Sykes-Picot boundaries as they appear on a map increasingly resemble little more than geopolitical mirages. We don't know how all of this is going to shake out, but there is an opportunity for immense realignment, an inevitability, I would say, as sectarianism and fractionism begins to erode the borders with which we are familiar. We need to get ahead of this, and in any future political settlement, make sure that the Christians and other minorities have a seat at the table and a stake, a real stake, in any future political result from what is today a war-torn and traumatic process of atomization. I want to conclude with one last story, one that ends on a more hopeful note than the story with which I began. Omar is a Yazidi man who fled from Sinjar to America. Unlike most of America's Yazidi community, which lives in Congressman Fortenberry's congressional district, Omar now lives in West Virginia. ISIS has slaughtered dozens of his family members, and his mother has been ransomed only recently at great cost in Raqqa. He returned to Sinjar after its liberation from ISIS last fall. While there, he fashioned a cross with 2 sticks, and as he was shot at with an assault rifle, he climbed atop the rubble of a Christian church near where he had once lived, a church ISIS had demolished. And he planted that cross there, high atop the ruin, in a sign of solidarity with his Christian brothers and sisters. Omar was in the gallery of the House for the vote on the genocide resolution. Afterward, he came to Congressman Fortenberry's office, where he told the congressman and I that he had made this sign because the Christians of Sinjar lived in peace with the Yezidis. As Omar told us, these were my neighbors. These were my friends. Christians, Yezidis, and others should remain an essential part of the Middle East's once rich tapestry of religious and ethnic diversity. They now have new cause for hope. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew. We're really happy to have Drew here today and representing Congressman Fortenberry. We thank you for your work being a voice for Christians, Yazidis, and other religious minorities in Washington, D.C. on the Hill. So thank you so much. Thank you. We'll have a brief break until 2:45. So we'll see everyone back here at 2:45 to conclude the program. Thank you so much.